The moment Tom Hardy walked onto the set of Good Morning America, there was an energy shift. Known for his intense roles and no-nonsense attitude, Hardy was there to promote his latest psychological thriller, but George Stephanopoulos had something else in mind. What started as standard promo chatter about Hardy's method acting quickly pivoted when George brought up a recent interview where Hardy criticized the commodification of trauma in entertainment. "Aren't actors like you also part of that cycle?" George asked pointedly. Hardy blinked, measured, then responded, "Not if you're doing it to say something real. There's a difference between mining pain for truth and packaging it for views." The exchange escalated as George pressed on, referencing scenes from Hardy's films that he described as glorified suffering. Hardy, visibly irritated, leaned forward. "If you want cartoons, go watch something else. My job isn't to make pain pretty." Asterisk. As the tension grew, the audience fell silent. George, attempting to redirect, questioned whether Hardy's brand of filmmaking was too dark for today's world, suggesting it fed pessimism instead of inspiring hope. Hardy's jaw clenched. "Real life isn't always hopeful, mate. You want sunshine and fake smiles? Don't book me." There was a pause, then Hardy unhooked his mic, stood up, and calmly declared, "This interview's about spin, not substance. I'm done." And with that, he walked off the set, leaving George stunned and producers scrambling. Within minutes, the moment exploded online. Clips of Hardy's exit went viral, with some praising him for refusing to be cornered, while others accused him of being hostile and unwilling to engage. But Hardy didn't respond publicly. Let the silence do the talking, fueling speculation, admiration, and critique all at once. And just like that, the clash became a cultural flashpoint, not just about one actor's temper, but about what it means to defend your art in a world obsessed with optics. Asterisk. In the days following the walk-off, Tom Hardy remained characteristically silent, refusing all interview requests and avoiding the noise entirely. Instead, his production company quietly released a short film on social media stripped down. Black and white monologue delivered by an unknown actor. The message was raw and poetic, a meditation on authenticity, on pain without performance, and on the quiet violence of being misunderstood. It never mentioned the GMA incident, but everyone knew it was Hardy's response. It was met with overwhelming support, especially from artists who felt similarly boxed in by sanitized, surface-level conversations around their work. Journalists, critics, and fellow actors weighed in, some praising Hardy's refusal to perform respectability, others warning that walking out of tough questions set a dangerous precedent. But the real story wasn't the clash, it was the aftermath. Asterisk. Suddenly, the industry began revisiting Hardy's body of work, not just through the lens of intensity, but of emotional integrity. Its characters, once seen as brooding or violent, were reinterpreted as fractured men fighting internal wars the world refused to understand. Film retrospectives reframed him not just as a performer, but as a cultural resistor, someone unwilling to smooth the edges of human experience to make others more comfortable. Meanwhile, Good Morning America faced subtle backlash. Editorials called out the tone of their interview, questioning whether their push for viral tension had sacrificed meaningful conversation. George Stephanopoulos addressed the moment briefly in a follow-up show, stating, "We always aim for honest dialogue, but sometimes tone gets lost." Yet Hardy's silence continued to speak louder. He hadn't just walked off a set, he had drawn a line in the sand between performance and provocation, between scripted civility and unfiltered truth. Asterisk. Weeks later, and Tom Hardy finally emerged publicly at an independent film festival in Toronto. The air around him was different, not just reverent, but curious. He walked the red carpet with quiet focus, gave minimal interviews, and sat in on panels where younger filmmakers praised his refusal to water down difficult truths for mass appeal. One particularly striking moment came during a Q&A session, when an aspiring director asked him how he handles being misunderstood. Hardy paused, then simply said, "You don't explain yourself. You show up, you tell the story, and you walk away if they try to write it for you." The crowd erupted into applause, out of celebrity worship, but because his words resonated with anyone who had ever felt pressured to compromise. Asterisk. Behind the scenes, producers and agents took note. Hardy's abrupt exit from GMA, once considered a potential PR disaster, had instead reinforced his brand as fiercely independent and artistically principled. His projects gained traction not despite the controversy, but because of it. He began receiving scripts from directors who had long admired his raw approach, but previously feared backlash from networks or studios. Even more telling was how other actors began subtly following his lead, challenging rehearsed media narratives, pushing back in interviews and refusing to be softened for the sake of palatability. Hardy hadn't just stirred the industry, he had, in his quiet way, shifted it. What some had called unprofessional was now being studied as a template for protecting one's voice in a world addicted to clickbait and control. Through it all, Hardy never once apologized because he knew he didn't need to. Months after the dust had settled, the Tom Hardy Good Morning America incident was no longer seen as a media flare-up, but as a catalyst for a deeper shift in celebrity culture. As awards season rolled around, Hardy's name re-emerged not for controversy, but for the searing performance he delivered in his new film, which critics now described as unapologetically human and emotionally fearless. Interviews he granted during this period were limited and tightly controlled, but when he did speak, he chose outlets known for depth, not sensation. In one rare conversation, he reflected on the moment without naming names. Sometimes silence is the most honest response. Sometimes walking away says more than 1,000 rehearsed answers. It was a quiet admission, and yet it echoed loudly through an industry built on optics. Back at Good Morning America, there was a noticeable tonal shift. The producers had taken internal stock, reportedly updating guest protocols and rethinking how they approached artists with reputations for intensity or unfiltered honesty. A quiet recalibration took place behind the scenes, less about avoiding tension. It's more about allowing space for truth, even if it wasn't perfectly packaged. Other actors followed suit, not in grand gestures, but in subtle resistances. Ending interviews early, challenging questions in real time, asking for more authenticity and less framing. Hardy had, unintentionally or not, sparked a new awareness. The rules of engagement were changing. Through it all, he stayed exactly as he had been, unmoved, unwavering, and uninterested in being liked at the expense of being real. What began as a heated moment on a morning talk show had evolved into something far more powerful. A quiet, cultural pivot toward truth over tolerance, depth over diplomacy, and presence over performance. By the end of the year, Tom Hardy's once controversial departure from Good Morning America had become a case study in boundaries not just for actors, but for creatives across industries. Universities included the moment in media ethics courses. Essays were written dissecting the power dynamic between interviewer and interviewee, and how Hardy's refusal to entertain a narrative he didn't believe in gave others permission to do the same. What had looked like an impulsive storm out now lived on as a deliberate, almost surgical act of reclamation. Hardy never set out to lead a movement, but that's exactly what had happened. Without ever naming names or defending himself, he had modeled how to maintain artistic and personal integrity under pressure. And with time, people stopped talking about the walk-off as a controversy at all. It was referenced not in terms of friction, but in terms of change. Hardy's new film received multiple nominations, not just for his performance, but for its thematic insistence on emotional rawness, a hallmark of his entire career, now fully appreciated. He continued to reject safe roles and soft scripts, opting instead to develop indie projects and produce stories that challenged rather than consoled. His silence remained his shield, but his work became his loudest answer. Why are we? For all the noise that followed him off that set, he'd never raised his voice. He hadn't needed to. In an industry addicted to apologies, Hardy had walked away and made none. And in doing so, he didn't just protect his voice, he proved it could echo longer. When left undisturbed,